Own Way, the podcast with me, your host, Kori McClurg. Hello, everyone. Welcome back again to the Get Out of Your Own Way podcast. I'm Kori McClurg. Today, we're going to talk about the second part of my book, Get Out of Your Own Way. I think I talked in the last session about the book is really laid out in three big parts. Your brain, your body, and then unleashing your power. And the reason for this is that my whole thesis is that many of us spend so much time, an inordinate amount of time, worrying, so mental energy, or physical, actual energy or time, just consumed with our health. And so once we, and when I say health, that can be, everything from just, worrying about being overweight and kind of the more, the more vain, right, concerns that we have, all the way up to and including, you're managing type 2 diabetes, or you're managing, your heart disease, or the various and sundry other side effects of being overweight, or just generally ill. And so it's a significant amount of energy that we're putting into being unhealthy, and that precludes our ability to really develop and then sort of unleash what I consider the kind of unique power that each of us has within us. And I know a lot of you feel it. I know a lot of you feel that you have like this thing, I like to think of it as kind of a small fire that's kind of burning inside you. And you desperately want to unleash it. You desperately want to pursue it. But all this other stuff, all this other, mind junk, and and then the physical components that go with that are just consuming so much of your time. And until we can, fix our brain and our body, we're going to be stuck until we fix it. And then finally, we'll get to that third part of being able to unleash our power once we've fixed our brain and our body and we've healed. So today, we're going to talk about the second part of the book, which is our body. We talked in the last episode about our brain. And so now we're going to talk about our body. Now, these two things are not disconnected, far from it. But we're really starting to understand in the research just how connected our brain and body is. But a lot of the research, focuses on one or the other. And so even though I believe, and there is ample evidence to confirm that our brain is not disconnected from our body, we aren't just cut off at the neck. However, a lot of the research is separate. And so I talk about them separately in my book. But, just one little stat to give you an idea of how connected they are is that, we've known for some time that obesity increases our risk for dementia by as much as 90%. I mean, that's almost double the risk just from being obese. So we know that there's a distinct impact from one to the other. But so as it relates though to our body and kind of sticking to that topic set, the biggest impact that we have on our bodies is what we eat. And the other thing that I want to emphasize is that this scourge of poor health that we are experiencing, especially in the Western world, although in the East, in Asia, they have begun to experience it as well, as more and more Western culture has proliferated there, in the form of, KFC and Taco Bell and all that. That this scourge of disease, it's not inevitable. There is 100 absolutely a direct line between what we're eating and the health that we're experiencing. And I know that a lot of people think that that your genetic predisposition is really what determines your quality of health. And that is absolutely untrue. It does not determine. There's a doctor that I just totally respect and admire, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, and he has this great phrase. He says, genes load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. And this is really sums up the fact that genetics plays just such a smaller part in our overall health than most people believe. I mean, one example is that obese people who have the lowest genetic risk for diabetes, they're still 5 times more likely to develop diabetes than normal weight people with the highest genetic risk. The bottom line is that lifestyle trumps genetics. So what you eat is by far the most important thing that will determine your health. I know so many people that are kind of in denial about this. I think that many of us have thought that oh yeah, sure, what I eat matters as far as whether I'm fat or not. But I hate to tell you, it matters for everything. It matters for everything. It matters for your risk of cancer, your risk of heart disease, your diabetes, whether or not you're going to get diabetes, whether or not you're just kind of have inflammation, your aches and pains, arthritis, it all matters. So you gotta, that's the first thing you gotta understand. What you eat is the first thing that's going to impact your body. And the reason, that people don't understand this and is that our doctors don't understand it. So it's an unfortunate situation, but a study that was published in Academic Medicine in 2015 found that medical students in the United States receive an average of less than 20 hours, 19.6 hours of nutrition education during their 4 years of medical school. And that's an average. Some schools provide as little as 2 hours of nutrition education. So here the research tells us, right, that the most important determining factor of your health is your nutrition, and yet our doctors know little to nothing about it. So it's a really unfortunate state of affairs of where we're at in sick care versus what's actually making us sick. So that should be indicative to you of what is being treated, right, by our doctors. What's being treated are symptoms, not the source of our symptoms, not the underlying cause of disease. So it's a disappointing state of affairs, and it should give you pause and should create some emphasis to you that you will have to be better educated about nutrition, because your doctor, unfortunately, is not going to be able to do it for you unless they took it upon themselves to get educated after, they went to medical school. There's a whole now, lifestyle disease doctors, people who do understand what the science is saying. They've immersed themselves in the research and they now, understand. But your average doc probably doesn't. So get really comfortable with educating yourself. Now, when I say get comfortable with educating yourself, the thing is, there are lots of just random headlines that are out there trying to grab your attention. And there's also just some random jackasses out there, right, on YouTube. And none of them, whether it's the media headline or it's the random jackass, they don't have your real best interest, right, at heart. What they want to do is, sell magazines, or they want to sell ads, YouTube ads. They're trying to get, it's clickbait, and they're trying to get views. They are not really interested in understanding what the preponderance of the research says. So you really have to have a critical eye for what you're consuming. And this is why, even though I know so many of you think this is like the most boring thing, you have to understand what research, what it is, and understand how, what it means, like how to determine whether something is of quality. Because you just can't trust that some random person is going to tell you the truth. Now, look, I perfectly, I understand the irony of what I'm saying here, because I'm just some, random person showing up, perhaps in your YouTube feed or elsewhere. But I can assure you that in my book, and anything that I would tell you, I researched it. I actually went to the research, or I went to an aggregator of the data, somebody who I know went and thoroughly researched the topic themselves, went through the journal, the published research, and who aggregated that data for me. So there's nothing that I'm going to tell you that you should be able to validate on your own. Here's my biggest thing in my book and in my programs, everything. You don't need to believe me. In fact, you should not believe me. You should be able to validate anything that I say, either through there's research, there's an ad, not just a study, but the preponderance of the data demonstrates what I'm telling you, or it's something that you can just test for yourself, right? Like maybe it's a mental technique or something. And so maybe that specific technique has not been researched, but it's a pretty easy thing for you to test for yourself, and there's no risk for you to test it, right? So go, again, don't believe me. Do not believe me. I don't want you to believe me. I want you to know, I want you to be able to validate what I'm saying. And so my whole book is all about it. I forgot 300 and something footnotes in the book, and it's not even that big a book, and there's 300 and something footnotes. So you can look at the research yourself and see, right, what it says. Now, I know that for a lot of us, you can go to this research, and it's kind of like a dog looking at a wristwatch, right? It doesn't mean anything to you. So in the book, and I'm going to talk about this here today, because I think this is the most important thing, the thing that you can arm yourself with, is having some just very cursory baseline understanding of what research is and why it's important. So I go through that in the book, to just a high level overview of what it means, of what this different research means, and what these studies, how you can tell a good study versus a bad study, or at least have some kind of inkling as to the attributes of a certain study. That's the most important thing, and that's really what I want to focus on today. You can read the book to go into the details of what the preponderance of the evidence says about nutrition's impact on your body. Spoiler alert, it's eat more plants. That's it. Eat more plants. And there's so much research that supports that. And you can look in the book and you can go through it in depth. And I go into all kinds of, whether you have a specific disease, I guarantee it's improved by eating more plants. But let's talk about research, because I want you to understand why this is so important. And I want you to be able to have some kind of baseline understanding, so that when you see somebody telling you something on YouTube, you can start to listen for what they're saying, like what kind of research backs up what they're saying. So let's do some of the basics. Let's run through some of the basics, because personally, I think this is the most important part of my book and the most important part of you being able to move forward in the world and trying to improve your health. So, all right, let's talk about just kind of the overall hierarchy of research. So first of all, kind of the baseline is any kind of peer-reviewed research. So this means that a study has been conducted in which the research method and the results have been documented in a paper that's submitted to a scholarly journal. So these journals, you've heard of them, right? Journal of the American Medical Association, Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, stuff like this. And they have experts reviewing these papers that are submitted to just assess whether they're appropriate for publication. And so the journals usually have some kind of, first of all, they have some kind of standard of independence. Like they're not just like trade magazines, meant just to be a positive, media outlet for a particular industry. And also the peer-reviewed research is this, because it gets reviewed before it's published in these journals, and there's criteria that is set for publication at all. And then because it's a group of their peers, of the researchers' peers that are reviewing it, that's kind of the bare minimum of for research, right? So you submit, if you're a scientist, usually what happens is you're at some, whatever, oftentimes an academic institution, but it doesn't have to be. And you have your area of expertise, you conduct some research, and then for that research to be known, right, it gets submitted to all the methods and the means and methods of the research, and the outcome of the research submitted with a paper, that summarizes all of that. And they provide, the details, the backup, all the data. It gets submitted to the journal. It gets peer reviewed by the journal, and that journal determines whether it's appropriate for publication in their journal. So that's the absolute minimum for some kind of research, a study that you're looking at to, gain knowledge or about nutrition, or about the appropriateness of, adapting something that you're looking at in this research. So peer review is the minimum, right? It's not, so some jackass blogger, their opinion does not meet the criteria and doesn't go through the same standard as peer-reviewed research. So even though, dude might be jacked and he might look super healthy, his opinion really doesn't matter. His opinion is based on his one experience. And oh, by the way, he might be not even his experience. He's just like saying whatever because it gets attention. Okay, so peer review, bare minimum. All right. Now let's talk about population studies or observational studies. So these can be super interesting for gathering data from various people. So within a population study, you can also have these longitudinal studies that can be also very telling because they track the participants over an extended period of time. And this allows us to see like long-term outcomes of, as an example here, the eating habits on disease progression. So, for example, like a few days or weeks, that's probably not enough for research to see that that's enough to see that a participant's cholesterol correlates to their diet. So pretty quickly, we can often see that, if you eat a bunch of eggs, and this is true, there's lots of research that shows this, many studies, you eat lots of eggs, your cholesterol goes up. You can see that within a few days or a few weeks. But, what we really want to know is, well, what is that? What is the impact of that elevated cholesterol on your overall health outcome, right? We want to know, do you get heart disease? We want to know, do you die more often? Do those people die more often? So that's where longitudinal, where you follow people long periods of time, that's why that is helpful. So, then, also, in these observational studies, we know that, like all the factors on individuals' lives are, can't necessarily be controlled in these studies. And so there can be confounding influences, right? However, these researchers they take lots of data about the participants so that they can control for those variables in the analysis and understand what is a strong correlation, what's really correlated. So they don't so if you want to do, a longitudinal study like this about, and they draw conclusions about cholesterol, they didn't just take data about their cholesterol. They took data about, how active they are, whether they're married or not. Their socioeconomic is a big one, right? We know definitively that the more money you have, the better health outcomes you have. So they can control for that in these large population studies. So yes, in these longitudinal studies, people, they're looking at effects of eating legumes, which is beans, on mortality rates. The researchers, they can analyze the data within the groups of people that have a similar income and see if there was a difference in mortality for those that ate more beans versus those that ate less. And that actually is not a hypothetical. There is a significant decrease in mortality rates for those who eat more beans. So population observational studies, these are, as the name, as it sounds, we're observing, right, what happens. There's not necessarily a control group. You're not necessarily using an intervention. You're observing what happens within these population groups. Okay, now let's talk about interventional studies. So interventional studies test a specific intervention, right, a treatment on a group of people to see how it affects each individual versus a control group, and the control group being the group that doesn't get treatment. You probably have heard of a specific interventional study, which is a the blinded, or it doesn't have to be double blinded, but the blinded placebo-controlled trial. Pharmaceutical companies often are required to use these studies before they bring pharmaceuticals to the market. The reactions of individuals in the studies, they are the specific data points. So when you gather the data points, you can see all the reactions to the interventions and the trends across the whole group. Now, a specific kind of this trial is a double-blinded placebo-controlled trial. And the double-blinded part means that the person taking the drug and the person administering the drug, like the doctor who's interacting with the patient, they don't know whether the patient's getting the actual drug or a placebo. The placebo-controlled part means that half of those participants in the study are in the control, which means they're not getting the drug or the treatment, but we can't let them know that. We can't let them know that they're not getting treatment, because then they would know they're in the control group. So we give them a placebo, and the placebo would just be a pill, that looks like a drug, but it's just inert, sugar pill or something. So why is this important? Well, the placebo effect is real. It's a natural occurrence. If people think they are getting treatment, they will often improve, even if you haven't given them anything. So to understand the effect of the actual treatment, just on the body, outside of this like psychogenic effect, then we must understand if the treatment was effective, beyond what that placebo or that control group experienced. In other interventional research, double-blind placebo-controlled trials aren't, necessarily possible, right? So, for example, when we're studying the effect of two diets, the participants and the research administrations are not going to be blind. They can see, right, what they're eating. So there can be no placebo because they can see, smell, taste, right? And so diet and lifestyle studies can effectively test interventions and establish causality, though, even when they can't be placebo controlled. Now, some studies have effectively tested small diet changes or individual ingredients with double-blind placebo-controlled, basically any way that you can sort of hide the intervention versus the control. However, a researcher can't like hide an entire meal in a capsule, right? Just for the sake of creating a double-blind placebo-controlled trial. So we rely on research other than these double-blind placebo-controlled, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? So, for example, the vast amounts of research on smoking, couldn't be conducted double-blind placebo-controlled, which actually is why the tobacco industry tried to deny the findings for many years, right? But we can all see the positive impact of a decrease on smoking rates. There's fewer incidents of all kinds of cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, birth defects. So we know smoking is bad, and we knew it for a long time, even before the Surgeon General issued a warning about it. But the industry will absolutely try to discount the research because they say, well, there's not a double-blind placebo control, which, don't get me wrong, DBPC is like the highest standard, but sometimes it's not feasible. And in these cases, and it's not feasible like it is like with smoking, but we all know it's bad for you. And there was all kinds of research that demonstrated it was bad for you. So, all right. So interventional. So now right? We're not just observing, we're intervening. And we want to have a intervention group and we want to have a control group so we can see what the difference was between the two, right? Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about another kind of interventional study. It's called a crossover study. So crossover studies are a specific kind of interventional study. And what's cool about them is that we can see changes in individuals because of the interventions, not just like the overall absolute result. So when you have a controlled trial or an interventional study where you have a controlled trial, where you have a control group and you have an intervention group, then it's like the same, you have two different sets of people, right? One of crossover study, you have people that are getting the intervention and they're not getting the intervention. So they're kind of their own control. So it's really interesting. You can see the impact on a single person from control to intervention in a crossover. Whereas in a, just your standard control trial, it's two different groups of people. So you don't necessarily see those individual impacts. You just see what the trend is across, all people. But in crossover studies, you see these changes in individuals because of the interventions, not just the overall absolute results. So in these studies, the participants act as their own control group. So like, for example, a participant receives treatment A for some period of time, and then they get treatment B for the same period of time, or maybe they get no treatment as the control. You might even have like another group start with treatment B when the other group starts with treatment A. And so this allows researchers to like remove elements of time or maybe even the season from the equation. And so this study methodology is really exciting because participants, since they're their own control, and any result like variability because of genetics or lifestyle, well, that's mitigated, right? Because they acted as their own control. You can see how they were with it, and you can see how they were, without it. And crossover study, it's kind of funny. Like, this is essentially what you conduct on yourself whenever you try a new lifestyle intervention, like diet or exercise. All right. So now let's talk about a meta-analysis. Now, research, so it's often conducted in similar areas of investigation with multiple studies. There can be hundreds, thousands of studies that are like about a similar thing. And that's good. We want that. That's not wasteful. Because in research, we want to see if we can reproduce results that other people have produced. Or maybe we want to alter the variables a little bit to see the impact, what changing the variables, how that impacted the results. If one trial had the intervention at, level X, well, maybe the next trial changes the intervention to level Y or something, right? So we can like test the bounds of things. So these studies are conducted numerous times with differing variables, and you can see what happens to the results. So, and also just because of like funding or some other like real world issues, individual studies, they're just limited, like in the number of test subjects, for example. However, the more test subjects there are, the more confidence we have that the research results are significant and applicable to like the broader population. So in a meta-analysis, researchers take all the data from several studies about a specific topic, and they analyze the data from all of those studies. So instead of like having 50 studies with 200 participants each, now you can do this meta-analysis and you've got 100,000 data points, 100,000 participants. This gives you way more confidence that the effects that you're seeing in the results are accurate. Of course, researchers conduct meta-analysis review. They review each study to ensure that the conditions are similar enough to be validly like included in the same data set. So there's some scrutiny before they just go like sweeping up all of this data. But regardless of the individual types of studies that have been done, we want to know what the preponderance of the evidence shows us. Now, what do I mean by that? So, and this is another thing to look out for as you're just listening to random people. One study is interesting. Like even, there's 20 participants in the study, and it shows that eating rocks, helps your mental acuity. That's interesting. But the 20 people is not, that's not a significant amount of people. And also, I'd be really curious to know like how that study was conducted and, all the details of that study. The point being there is that because somebody says, well, this one study said that you should eat rocks. I find that interesting, but I don't necessarily consider that an actionable thing. I don't really, that doesn't really give me the confidence to say, you know what, I'm going to start eating rocks because this one study with 20 people um, said it's good for you. What we want to do, and this is what meta-analysis does for us, we want to know what the preponderance of the evidence shows. So when you have these large numbers you have multiple studies and you've gathered, thousands of participants because you've gathered the data from all of these studies, now you're starting to understand, what an actionable observation is, what an actionable piece of information is. So I often hear people on YouTube, on podcasts, and they have these little things that they've pulled out of left field. And for sure, that stuff is interesting. But I wouldn't, don't put all your faith in that one study. You really want to understand what all of this other evidence has said, because especially if this is a well-researched topic, so there's hundreds of studies on it, and there's one outlier study that is contrary to, the 99 other studies, that would indicate to me that something was wrong in the methodology, right? In the way that study was conducted. Now, of course, we should, and this is again where meta-analysis is helpful. They can look at the way that each of those studies were conducted and be able to articulate why that one study, may have been different. And if there's, validity to that, then, maybe somebody needs to go research and conduct some other studies in that particular way. But by and large, we want to see what, again, the preponderance of evidence shows us. That is what is actionable. So again, one study with, freak results amongst hundreds of others, it's just unlikely to stand up to scrutiny. Another critical element in understanding how or why to implement research results or any other intervention, it's, just understanding the risk. For example, if you're considering a new drug, you want to understand the potential benefits and the potential risk. What are the potential side effects? In nutrition research, the risk, it's, for the most part, it's non-existent. I mean, unless you're just really going all out on something crazy. Like, if a study shows that broccoli is good for you and you consider including more broccoli in your diet, the only side effect of increasing your cruciferous vegetable intake are beneficial ones. I've never come across even a case report of like broccoli overdose, in the scientific literature. And maybe there is, and maybe broccoli is contraindicated, like for some medication that I'm not aware of. But we're trying to prevent you from even needing medication. So, eat broccoli and lots of other, vegetables. But, so like, that's an important thing to understand as well. Like in all of this research, what's the risk? Like if somebody like me who's telling you, hey, eat more plants, what's the risk to that, right? Why wouldn't you try that? there's no risk. So yeah, I mean, so to sort of sum up the meta-analysis, again, it's meant to gather up lots of data from lots of studies. It's a good thing that lots of studies have been conducted about, the same thing, because then we can like look at all of this research and we feel confident that these are reproducible results and that it's something that we can take, action on. So, yeah, I mean, the bottom line to this kind of rambling on, I know about research is that you just need a little bit of background knowledge to kind of start dipping your toe into understanding what people are telling you, and being able to have a really critical eye when, just the random Joe Blow is giving their opinion about what you should be eating. I hope that you understand, like, the scientific rigor is important, and that developing that critical eye, your own critical eye, that's just the best way for you to kind of wade through the whole media landscape. Your neighbor who swears by raspberry ketones, that's just not it might be a great person, your neighbor, but that's one person's opinion, and it doesn't necessarily meet the standard of scientific rigor. And so, you just always want to have that kind of critical thinking cap on, and be, questioning things. I, throughout my book anyway, I attempted to include lots of studies that demonstrated a particular point. If I could find a meta-analysis about that thing, then I included that, because that, to me, that's kind of everything wrapped into one, would be a meta-analysis. But it's really up to you, especially if you're like looking for something very specific. You have a particular condition and you want to know how nutrition impacts it. Having that critical eye and having some kind of background, even just a little bit of background understanding about what this research means and the kind of research that's done. And if you don't want to jump into these individual research papers, I don't blame you. There's so much jargon, like any industry, medicine and nutrition, right? And biology, it's littered with vocabulary that if you haven't been in that field for years, it's daunting. And so, I do rely on kind of some intermediaries who do look at this research and have, they have, their MDs or their Masters of Public Health, that kind of thing, and who can, break down some of that jargon. One of my favorite websites is nutritionfacts.org. They do a great job of keeping up with the medical literature. And then once there are a significant amount of studies that begin to address a certain nutrition topic, then they'll like put it all together in a video. So I find that very helpful, and all the research is cited. This is a great way. This is a really great way for you to start to get familiar with research. So if you go to like a nutritionfacts.org, you watch a video on whatever topic you're interested in, all that research is listed there for you. So you can actually go to the study itself and start to understand what you just watched in this video, and see where where they summarized that information, or where they referred to a study that says XYZ. Then you can go to the study yourself and start to like understand it. It's helpful to have that kind of the normal English vocabulary applied to it first, and then when you drill down into the study, then you can start to correlate that to the more scientific, or the more like that particular area of studies jargon. So yeah, the bottom line is, it's to all of this is that what you put in your mouth is the most important thing, to impact that impacts your health. There's no denying that. And that we have to be able to look at what we're seeing in popular culture, in the media, with a critical eye, and understanding just kind of the hierarchy of research will be so helpful in you being able to kind of wade through that. All right. I hope this was helpful. And if you want more, then check out the book and dig into it.